Welcome to a special edition of the Gnostic Warrior. I'm your host, Mo, and welcome to the MindWar, Michael Aquino's mind control techniques to take over the world. Former high-ranking U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and self-professed Satanist, the late Michael Aquino argued in his book, MindWar, that mass mind control was a much more humane alternative than to physical war. Violating, infiltrating, and thus controlling someone's or an enemy's consciousness was a science that he not only sought to know and understand, but was also paid very well by the U.S. government to do so. Aquino was head of the psychological operations, PsyOp for short, for the U.S. Army, and a well-known high priest in the Chruch of Satan with Anton LaVey back in its heyday during the 1960s. He went on to form the Temple of Set. His books have been published in many languages and have been cited all around the world. This guy was the real satanic deal, if there ever was one. In my opinion, Aquino makes Crowley's black magical escapades look quite tame when it comes to the scope and science behind the magical methods he shares, meaning that Crowley's sexual tricks are mainly for satanic beginners and intermediates, while Aquino's scientific-based Satanism was for the military to control and mold minds in order to win the mind war. This is not some top-secret information that I'm sharing with you. He openly had written about his beliefs, studies, and specialties in many of his papers and books like MindWar, and some of those top-secret documents that do not show any of his alleged satanic pedophilia involvement at the Presidio Army Base have been declassified. A quote from Michael Aquino: "Set, the sentient being whom mankind has loved, hated, worshipped, cursed, praised, and reviled as the Prince of Darkness. To echo the words of G.B. Shaw in The Devil's Disciple, I promised him my soul and swore an oath that I would stand up for him in this world and stand by him in the next. This remains my oath today." The quote again from Michael Aquino. The premise of Aquino's mind control ideas were simple. Take the ancient philosophy of Plato's theories of forms, which we live in an orderly universe created by forms, predominantly the form of good, which he describes as the brightest region of being, and turn it on its head. In the world of symbology, it would be akin to taking the ancient pentagram and inverting it into the satanic pentagram, and that is exactly what is symbolized here, hidden in plain sight from those who cannot see. With Plato, the form of good is the cause of all things, and when it is seen, it leads a person to act wisely. And with Aquino, you would use the form of bad, or what is not good and illogical, and the cause of all things, so people would become ignorant. In Plato's theory, humans form a bridge between God, good, and the material world. In the Republic, the ideal community in a city which would be established in accordance with nature. Aquino's theory, I argue, inverted patterns and techniques to form, instead of a bridge between what the Greeks would have called the abyss and Christians the devil and the material world, a bridge between the devil or the force of the earth to allow evil to dominate the human consciousness so they become beast-like automatons, to be herded and led like sheep, hence the whole mind control point. Aquino discusses the science behind mind control techniques by reaching into the mind of enemy combatants using magnetization with an electrical magnetic field and alpha brainwave conditioning. What has been described as acoustic psychocorrection technology that has the ability to control minds and alter behavior of civilians and soldiers, which also involves the transmission of specific commands via static or white noise bands into the human subconscious without upsetting other intellectual functions, aimed at altering the behavior on willing and unwilling subjects. Again, these are quotes that I'm stating here. In one of the latest video interviews before his death, Aquino speaks with podcaster Sean Stone, the son of Oliver Stone, about his lower and higher consciousness and what is called the architecture of thought. Something he claims that most people know absolutely nothing about this, but was something that he went into depth as part of the PsyOp research that led to the book MindWar. He confidently says that you will have not heard of this from anyone else. Aquino tells Sean that part of your mind that draws logical conclusions and reason and that discusses things with other people is conscious thinking, being algorithmic, representing 5% of your consciousness, while the other 95% is your subconscious, which is governed by pattern recognition, which overlays reality that you perceive as truth. He says that we refer to this subconscious without even thinking to validate if our thoughts are true or not, or are governed by patterns. These, he says, are mechanical. Aquino goes on, and these perceptions that you are not aware of. For example, we are all familiar with the brain frequencies, the alpha, the beta, the delta, the theta. Well, alpha, he says, puts you in a pleasant mood. Theta puts you in a creative mood. And beta puts you in a somewhat nervous, confrontational mood. So if you would like people in a room to be in a good mood, you first sweep it to make sure there is no beta, and then cover the room with some alpha, Aquino said. I detail this science in my own articles, Control the Magnet, Control the Mind, and Human Magnetoreception, the Science of Ordo Apkeo. Here is a full video of Aquino's last interview before he died, and the mind control science I speak of starts at about the 15-minute mark. I'll play a little bit here so you could hear it, and I will include a link on GnosticWarrior.com in the article. So if you click on the link, it takes you to my website, GnosticWarrior.com, where you could check out the video in full.
That we're still having trouble actualizing today. So when I started researching MindWar, what I wanted to look at is exactly how does human thought function. And this in the book is under the heading of the architecture of thought. And most people know almost nothing about this. You will not have heard this really from anyone else because it's something that we've gone into in extreme depth in PsyOp research. Now, the part of your mind that makes, that draws logical conclusions and that reasons and that discusses things with other people is the algorithmic part, and it is conscious thinking, and it takes place in about 5% of your thought process. The other 95% takes place in your subconscious and is referred to academically as pattern thinking. These are these large overlays of reality and perceived truth that you refer to without thinking about them, that tell you whether your thoughts are valid or not. And a lot of the ways that these patterns come into existence are mechanical through your senses and your sensory perceptions that you're not aware of. For example, we're all familiar with the various brain frequencies, the alpha, the beta, the delta, and the theta. Well, alpha puts you in a pleasant mood, theta puts you in a creative mood, beta puts you in a somewhat nervous and confrontational mood. So if you would like a room full of people to be in a fairly good mood and cooperative towards resolving a problem, first you sweep the room to make sure there's no beta in it, and then secondly, you blanket it with alpha. That's just one example. Color perception. Most people think of colors as something that you choose. Well, I like this color or I like that color. Actually, at the subconscious level, colors have a very strong impact on the human constitution that most people aren't aware of. The color red makes us nervous, brittle, antagonistic. The color blue makes us thoughtful and creative. The color green makes us somewhat passive. This, again, is at the sort of eye chemistry level. We're not talking about preferences here or situations where you might have a particular passion for this or that color. So by constructing these, by presenting certain colors along with certain brain waves and so on, and several other different situations here. You can actually construct, excuse me for just a minute here. Oh, sorry about that.
No problem. So based on the color patterning, you can
Yes.
create a certain mood, a certain response.
You can create a more cooperative atmosphere, which is what you're trying to do. So the entire thrust of the MindWar book and all of what I call the psychons or psychological control systems in it are basically to explain the influences from the objective universe, from the physical universe, that come into your body all the time and influence your perception of reality at the subconscious level. And to take all of these essentially and push them in the direction of intelligence and positive thinking and cooperation. This sounds almost like science fiction, but it's actually quite scientific and quite handleable by various devices that you can use. So what you were referring to a few minutes ago as some of the ways in which, say, the CIA, for example, blundered around with MK Ultra, were completely misguided in this sense, because they were trying to use things like chemistry, sensory deprivation, and stress to bludgeon people into some sort of passive cooperation at that 5% of argumentative level. And all it accomplished, all those programs ever did, was to scramble people's thinking and to frighten them. And that gets you nowhere in terms of problem solving, and it actually gets you nowhere in terms of intelligence acquisition, because then you're just dealing with people who are frightened or hurt or psychotic in some way. So those basically were a huge waste of time. And I wrote a paper some years back about one of them that followed up MK Ultra, called Project Stargate, in which I subtitled it $20 million up in smoke and mirrors, which is what it amounted to. So what MindWar is all about is not touching that 5% of argumentative or algorithmic thinking at all. All it's intended to do is to put the most positive atmosphere towards the 95% of our pattern thinking that gives us a disposition as to how we wish to interact with other people and to cooperate with them. Because if you can get that kind of a cooperative and positive problem-solving atmosphere, then the 5% is peanuts. It's
There you go, in Michael Aquino's own words. So again, he's talking about the lower and the higher consciousness. The 5% would be, if you can use your mind, would be your thinking consciousness, the self, where you use reason, etc. You're actually using your mind. The 95% would be the actual subconscious, where you're not aware of. I talk about that often through my articles and my website, and that being often through your second brain, right? Your GI tract. A lot of these chemicals and signals come from there. And a lot of the techniques that Aquino mentions go much, much deeper. And of course, these mind control techniques would also use black magic, i.e. lies, propaganda, false symbology, optical illusions, etc., to memorize and thus control someone or an entire population's mind without them being aware of and or doing immediate damage to avoid detection. As Aquino once had written, coercive measures, if they are to work effectively, must remain undetected. Who knows? Did Aquino have any involvement in MK Ultra? He sure knows a lot, and I mean, if he was involved in the PsyOp type of stuff, maybe so. A form of dark mental jiu-jitsu to bend the hardened hearts and turn upside-down minds of the public who only have a cursory understanding of reasoning and logic and the cultural and linguistic nuances needed to neutralize a real mind control threat effectively. To Aquino and the U.S. military, the ignorant and malleable American population was the perfect testing ground for his MindWar ideologies, a people he could easily mold, his new mind control laboratory. Aquino had written, "For millennia, violent warfare has been the scourge of humanity, and all attempts to end it through negotiated or imposed peace have brought only temporary respite. On the premise that war is an endemic to the human disposition, MindWar proposes to eliminate its killing and destruction by replacing it with a far more powerful kind of war, one which focuses on the human mind both individually and collectively. The persons and property of people are removed as targets, replaced by the divisive situations and problems originating in their consciousness. These are then controlled, adjusted, and reformed to produce a harmonious and cooperative total environment." Aquino claims that this is not to be done theoretically, but in a laboratory implementation through the structural design of the U.S. Army's 3 special operations branches: psychological operations, special forces, and civil affairs. In the book, he outlines a global mind war campaign with the international crisis resolution procedures of the United States modified to facilitate it. In the book, he also cites the use of magnets on the human brain to control thought, which has now become a reality. For these reasons, I list and his owns and the affiliation with Satanisms and the accusations of pedophilia, Aquino remains one of the most controversial figures in U.S. history, a type of satanic arch-villain from the abyss who openly paraded around like he was the devil's son incarnate and was damn proud of it. But for the U.S. military, he was an asset to be protected at all costs. After all, their business is based on warfare and global domination, in which deception plays a massive role. So this type of PsyOp information to win wars, both domestically and abroad, was pure gold. As a result, Aquino's MindWar seems to have become an openly known field manual for how we run our country. The book was an expanded version of a paper he co-authored for the U.S. Army called From PsyOp to MindWar, which bore a top-secret notation and was circulated to the U.S. PsyOp community and the U.S. War Army College, amongst other actors. Aquino stated that it was originally intended for the eyes of government policymakers alone and is unclassified only because a level high enough to embrace it has never anticipated or even conceptualized it. What it is capable of setting in motion is simply beyond all previous interactive experience, Aquino says. But as Michael Aquino warns his readers, and I'm sure the governments who will employ such mind control techniques, that this type of black magic can not only be devised to save humanity, but supersede it altogether. This is where the danger lies. Aquino writes, "For the first time in practical history, the actual machinery of human thought is accessed by the methodical application of science, psychology, and esoteric arts of antiquity. MindWar assumes, as did the ancients, that the ultimate aspiration of mankind is to be the good. But, like the Manhattan Project, which rashly opened an earlier genie's bottle, MindWar could be misused with even more ominous consequences. Devised to save humanity, it could also supersede it. Hence, this genie must be examined and evaluated while its bottle is still sealed." Interestingly, inventors of such techniques like Aquino always issue dire warnings to the investors of their ideas. It is akin to inventing the nuclear bomb and stupidly thinking no one will test it out for atomic shits and giggles. Hell, we Americans have been known to test these devilish inventions until they take us almost to hell. To address Aquino's point in regards to the American Manhattan Project, on July 16, 1945, about 120 miles south of Santa Fe, New Mexico, a nuclear bomb was dropped at 5:29 a.m., resulting in a blast with a massive mushroom cloud 40,000 feet high that was visible for 200 miles and blew out windows in civilian homes up to 100 miles away. A mind control cover-up story was released to the American public claiming that a large ammunition dump had exploded in the desert. The authorities controlling the Manhattan Project did not just test one nuclear bomb. Dozens were tested all around the country. As a result, some scientists say to this day, people in these areas where these bombs were tested and dropped suffer from abnormally high amounts of diseases like cancer. A mind war in the form of real bombs striking utter fear and agonizing death to our enemies both domestically and abroad, including 2 that were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing or maiming over 200,000 people. Japan would surrender shortly after that, bringing an end to World War II, but a new era to a global arms race, bringing the world to almost bitter destruction. Be very careful when reading Aquino's MindWar, because it may be a PsyOp within a PsyOp. After all, these are what some might call the hellish military ingredients for scientific black magic, psychotronic warfare, mind control, and world domination. No mind control soup for you. Quite the contrary. Regarding the American people, and most people who may read this book, Aquino presents both occult and scientific information that will simply be too difficult for 99.9999% of the people who read it to understand. Hence, why it has been unclassified by the U.S. military and is openly available for anyone to purchase online. MindWar is a military field manual on how to conduct modern psychological and spiritual warfare on those people who deserve to have their minds controlled. How sinister it may all seem, I argue, or I hope, that to one day have a heaven on earth, to have the good Aquino talks about, you have to create a temporary type of hell so the demons and angels can appropriately be magnetized to their true destinies, to be tracked, weighed, and judged. Let me finish by adding that it's no big secret that the U.S. Department of Defense has a long history of human experimentation without the consent of the incredibly ignorant American people. But with the advent of the National Security Act and the Patriot Act, people like Aquino and their ideas are not only protected, they are immortalized. But the battle goes on, my sovereign thinking brothers and sisters around the globe, and I have one final proclamation. Carefully guard your thoughts, because they are the source of true life. Proverbs 4:23. To lose sovereignty over our minds is to lose the ability to control our lives, nation, and the world. When we lose reason and the capacity to remember past mistakes, we will repeat them in the future. When we lose our ability to control one's mental functions, we give our attention, memory, and God-given rights to have rational thought and decision-making to an outside authority. Human dignity requires mental autonomy, which has been defined as the presumption that one is a person whose actions, thoughts, concerns are worthy of intrinsic respect because they have been chosen, organized, and guided. Democracies are only possible if citizens are mentally autonomous. The ability to think freely is so essential to our identity that to violate it is to deprive us of personhood altogether. But that is the whole point of these mind wars, isn't it? With that said, there is hope for those of us citizen mental combatants lucky enough to have survived this far in the mind war. Either through natural law, mental might, or the grace of God, like Moses, we have remained a formidable foe to the state black magicians. Like the miracle Israelite baby floating down the Nile into the Pharaoh's arms, we have made it through the psychological warfare, propaganda, and mental muck constantly directed at us by the court magicians. Spiritually tattered, but still thinking, breathing, and with the resemblance of an original thought, we remain somewhat free, as they still try to tighten the magnetic noose around our necks, and the water in the pot continues to become hotter. Well, hell, I never said winning the mind war would be easy.